Welcome to the August Division III webinar. I'm Allie Spungen, and today I'm joined by Bill Regan and Louise McCleary. A few reminders before we get started. This PowerPoint is available now on the webinars page on ncaa.org. The recording will be available by the end of this week, and we will also email it out to all participants who registered. Also, to ask questions, please use the Q&A function at the top right of your screen, and we will answer them at the appropriate time during today's webinar. So let's get started. On today's agenda, we will be talking about Student Athlete Advisory Committee updates, general updates, subcommittee updates, Management Council updates, including championships, 2025 NSAAC convention and legislative proposals, and sports wagering. And then we'll end with some federated playing rules review, athletic training working group recommendations, and then also President's Council updates, Division III budget, and the transfer year and residence. So I'm up first with our SAAC update. Some of our hot topics during the July meeting, we received divisional and association-wide updates covering common topics such as sports wagering, various legal cases, NCAA Power Index, championships enhancements, and many more different topics. Congressional engagement remains a hot topic for SAAC and our administration throughout Division III. SAAC members reviewed their role in messaging and storytelling to congressional members, as well as updates on the status of congressional engagement. SAAC encourages all campus and conference SAACs to continue telling their stories locally via letters, emails, and videos. Next up, legislation is right around the corner. The committee discussed the Division III legislative process and reviewed the initial proposals for the 2025 NCAA convention. The committee will revisit the full slate of legislative proposals at its fall video conference before members solidify and solicit feedback from their conferences and take official positions at the November 10th and 11th meeting held here in the national office. Communication is another focus of SAAC this year. They want to reach out to the campuses and conferences and to make sure that your student athlete voice is heard. They are working on this through improved communication before and after our quarterly meetings. They want to stay connected between meetings as well. So if you need to contact your national SAAC representative, there is a representative report on the SAAC page where you can find out who your national rep is. So please visit the SAAC page and you'll find that SAAC representative listing there. Communication is key, so please have it flow from campus, conference to national SAAC. Finally, from our SAAC updates is the Division III 50th anniversary finale. SAAC members got an update on the year-long 50th anniversary celebration that ended on August 1st. Highlights of the campaign included a weekly podcast series featuring student athletes, a celebration of first champions in each sport, a series of Did You Know graphics, and the week of service in late 2023 featured more than 6,000 student athletes, coaches, and administrators completing more than 60,000 hours of community service. So thank yous to everyone that competed in Division III to make that a successful 50th anniversary celebration. For updates on our SAAC committee updates and work that they're doing, SAAC members solidified their 2 subcommittees for the upcoming academic year. They will be sports ethics and fan behavior and mental and physical health. For sports ethics and fan behavior, SAAC aims to provide best practices for sportsmanship and fan behavior. So be on the lookout throughout this year for hopefully some one-pagers and some best practice resources coming from SAAC. Next up is our mental and physical health subcommittee. This year's campaign will be centered around the hashtag Thrive Together. In the coming weeks, SAAC will reveal a SAAC mental health logo and start a new year of programming. So check out their Instagram and Twitter pages for that information. The group will also be installing a podcast style of hot topics updated every quarter. This first one will be around congressional engagement, and then forward we'll be doing name and image and likeness and some other hot topics. SAAC will always continue to support the Division III's partnership with an overall commitment to Special Olympics as we enter our 14th year of that partnership. During the joint meeting, the Management Council and SAAC hosted an amazing event with our local Special Olympics Indiana in the NCAA Hall of Champions that featured cornhole, basketball, and lots of fun and high fives. From a Special Olympics engagement for the last year from 2023-24. It shows that nearly 4,000 student athletes dedicated 13,000 plus hours to Special Olympics events throughout the year while raising over $10,000 for Special Olympics. D3 SAC is very appreciative of all your efforts and continue those from a conference and campus level to support our partnership with NCAA and Special Olympics. So continue to follow our Twitter and SAC page and look forward to some great work from D3 SAC this year. That's all I have from a SAC perspective. I will turn over the virtual mic to Bill Regan.
Thank you, Allie. Always difficult to follow Allie and our SAC student athletes. Bill Regan, Managing Director with Division III. What I'd like to do is provide a quick update about our Management Council meeting that occurred July 22nd, 23rd. The first update is in the space of championships. The Management Council approved a waiver that would provide additional flexibility to our sport committees, our team sport committees, when establishing brackets. What it would do is ensure, an attempt to try to ensure that our top seeded teams no longer compete against each other in our preliminary rounds of our championship. Our sport committees and championships committee are still working through what does it mean to be a top seeded team? How many does that mean? Is it the top 6, top 8, top 4? And that waiver will actually become effective for this academic year. The Championships Committee recommended this because rather than making a legislative change right now, they wanted to kind of work through this over the next year or two, make sure that they understood the space, make sure they actually had the right format for championships for all the team sports before they went ahead and made a final legislative recommendation. So that's why you see it's a waiver for up to 2 years, because if they feel good after a year, they may actually move a little bit quicker to make an actual legislative change. Katie, the next slide. Another change that the Championships Committee recommended was to include live streaming as a requirement for hosting a regional or preliminary round of a team championship in 2024-25. Live streaming minimums will include at least having one camera and a neutral play-by-play and color commentator. Championships Committee recognized, and this actually came from one of the external reviews of Lewis and Rice, that says branding of Division III really should be an important emphasis. And there's a recognition that one of the best brands that we have is our student athletes. And what a better way to showcase our student athletes and but to do it through an NCAA championship event. So this hosting requirement, we understand, has some related expenses. So in addition, part of the most recent budget recommendations, at least we'll talk about, included a $1,000 per day stipend that would be provided to host to help offset the expenses related to production, announcer costs, or whatever infrastructural costs you have relative to live streaming. You know, the NCAA has adopted the NCAA Power Index to help create the brackets and to assist in the seeding of teams in those brackets. That is effective for all team sports, beginning with the 24-25 academic year. Our championship staff has worked really hard with our sport committees to kind of create the criteria for each of those team sports to implement the NPI, or the NCAA Power Index. You can find that information as well as a question and answer document on the Championships Committee webpage. You'll also find on individual sport committee web pages their individual reports in which they establish the criteria and an explanation of those criteria for their particular sports. Currently, we're working on getting the webinars that were conducted for all team sports, for coaches associations and for coaches to explain the NPI for their particular sport. Those particular links we're working with our IT staff to ensure that those links become active again and are up or on all the individual sport pages. If you need to get that information, would like to get that information, you certainly can reach out to our sport committee liaisons, and you can find the list of those liaisons in our Division III Sports Committee webpage. Our 2025 convention, we should start talking about that already because it's going to be right around the corner before you know it. And for this year, the schedule is moved from a Wednesday, Saturday to a Tuesday, Friday. So yes, the convention will conclude hopefully by the afternoon of January 17th, which is a Friday. So some key programming, you can see that everything's effectively just moved a day earlier. On Tuesday, you can see our association-wide session, State of College Sports, in the awards presentation. Tuesday, we move to our educational sessions, Special Olympics, Women of the Year, and Division III LGBTQ of the Year award celebration. And Thursday and Friday, we have our issues forum, and then we have our business session. This change in format from Wednesday to Tuesday as a start and from Saturday to Friday as an end is just for the 2025 convention. There will be consideration and a determination of whether that change should actually be implemented for future conventions based on feedback from this convention, as well as looking at the specific venues that are hosting the convention to ensure that they can facilitate the change in those dates. So those will be made on an annual basis. Next. We have several convention proposals. The first set that are in front of you were convention proposals that have been sponsored by the governance structure and are being considered within the governance structure itself. The first is a graduate student enrollment exception. Effectively, what this would do is for a student athlete who graduates from a Division III institution who is enrolled at another non-NCAA institution that doesn't have an athletic program, that student athlete can continue to compete for the Division III institution, provided there's still an athletic relationship between those two institutions. The second proposal would amend the legislative process. It would effectively amend the legislative process to do two things: to create greater engagement with the membership and greater collaboration through the legislative process. The next one would be to establish a national collegiate championship for the sport of women's wrestling, which I believe would be in the spring of 2026 if adopted. And the last one is a waiver of reclassifying institutions. What it would do would permit a reclassifying institution to submit a waiver to our membership committee to move the reclassifying process from a 3-year period of time to a 2-year period of time. Next slide. The next set of slides are legislative proposals that we received from the membership that have received sponsorship. First is to increase the composition of our Student Athlete Advisory Committee. Effectively, what it would do would remove the associate label. It would provide that every multi-sport conference would have a primary member on our Student Athlete Advisory Committee. The next proposal would change the number of required schools needed to qualify to be a multi-sport conference. It would parallel the required number needed for the AQ, so to reduce the number from 7 to 6 active members in order for you to maintain your multi-sport conference identity. The third proposals would affect postgraduate student athlete eligibility requirements. Effectively, what it would do is if a student athlete is enrolled in a graduate program, and that student athlete wants to transfer from one graduate program to a second graduate program, that student athlete would have to be academically eligible when they left the first graduate program to be immediately eligible if they want to participate at the second graduate program. Institution, rather. The fourth proposal would be one that would add a additional exemption to our federated playing rules process. As you know, that every division has a process that it created to allow the institution to adopt a federated playing rule, a rule specifically for Division III. What this proposal would create the opportunity for our management council to be able to exempt Division III from having to follow a common playing rule that has been adopted by our playing rules oversight panel. And the last proposal, which we believe may be withdrawn because there is a similar proposal that's been adopted by our management council that is actually a non-controversial proposal. What this proposal actually does is effectively eliminates the off-season, the preseason off-ice exception, and that is because the playing season already permits for much of this activity already. If you go to the next slide. Sports wagering. Our management council, as well as our president's council, have engaged in conversations about our current sports wagering legislation. Our management council heard feedback from our Division III SAAC as well as our Division III Student Athlete Reinstatement Committee specifically about the prohibition of student athletes and athletic administrators being unable to wager on professional athletics. So the conversation really stemmed around whether it is time to consider a proposal that would allow for more deregulation. That deregulation would effectively permit student athletes and athletic administrators on our Division III campuses to potentially wager on professional athletics. It's important to note that the councils will continue this discussion. It's just an initial discussion. They've been talking about for a little bit, are continuing to talk about this with a little bit more purpose now, a little more specificity. It's also important to note that this legislation is a common legislation, which means all three divisions would potentially vote on a similar type of change, or it's being considered by all three divisions for a similar change. Next slide. Just talked about our federated playing rules. Division III adopted its playing rules process back last July. So it's been implemented for a little over a year now. So the management council had asked the staff to do a review of the process, to do a few things. One, to ensure is the process being followed, or all the steps being executed. Do all the committee members and all those people involved in the process understand the process, and do they feel they have the ability to federate a rule? In essence, they want us to determine, is it working, is it not working? And if it's not working, what potential changes should be recommended? At this point, the staff gave a preliminary review at the July council meeting and will give its final review with any recommendations for consideration by the council at the October meeting. One note here about our visible action clock is, there was a proposal to make the visible action clock mandatory for the sport of baseball. Through the federated rules process, however, the Division III has actually federated this and now will make this rule permissive or optional for our Division III institutions. Divisions 1 and 2, it will be required, but for Division III, it will be permissive. So this is an example of how the federated playing rules process is working. And I believe my last slide is the Athletic Training Working Group. Again, this is a working group that's been in existence for about a year. And if you remember, their charge is really to look at the issues that are affecting Division III institutions' ability to retain and hire athletic trainers. This working group is really in the final stages of creating its recommendations. It has been vetting those recommendations with the councils. It was part of the issues forum. It's also been with our SSI staff and CSMAS. The working group is in a place now where it is creating its final recommendations, and those final set of recommendations, its final report, we hope will be published and provided to the membership at the end of August or early September. And I think with that, I will pass it over to my colleague, Louise McCleary.
Hey, Bill, before we move on, we do have one question in the queue.
Okay.
I'd rather get to it now before we get too far ahead. We had a question come in about that non-controversial legislation on ice hockey.
Yep.
Is that elimination effective immediately? And can the teams use their 8 flex days on the ice the week before the start of the playing season now?
Yeah, I believe that proposal was adopted in concept, will be adopted in October by the council, will become effective at that point.
Thank you. That's the only question we have. So Louise, all you.
All right, Katie, I was going to say the same thing. So Louise McCleary, Vice President of Division III. If there are any council or SAAC members or committee members listening in, we want to thank you. It's been a very, very productive year. President's Council had their summer video conference yesterday, and I'm going to really focus on 2 areas that not only President's Council tackled, but so did Management Council, as well as Strategic Planning and Finance, and several other governance committees. So we're going to jump in with the budget updates. I think all of you, if you've listened before, you knew that this year was a budget planning year. Starting in FY25, we are going to see an increase of about 13% to our budget. That's awesome news. Typically, it's in the range of 2 to 3%. And really, our budget, our annual revenue comes from our 2 broadcast agreements. Our CBS Warner Brothers agreement started a new agreement. It will in 2025. It runs through 2032. And then we have the new ESPN agreement. And so that has resulted in a significant revenue bump starting next year. And I'm going to highlight 3 areas where the councils have now approved, it will go into effect September 1, these new enhancements. So the first is around our enrichment programs. You can see it's just over $400,000 in new initiatives. The key new initiatives that I want to highlight for you with the conference grant program that is distributed to our 42 conferences, every institution within those conferences have access to these dollars. Institutions work directly with their conference commissioners. There has been an increase in Tier 1, and that's specifically for our conference office staff to be able to get professional development as well as travel reimbursements at a bit of a higher level and more consistent among the 42 conferences. Our commissioners also understand that so many of our campuses are dealing with a crisis in officiating, not enough officials, struggling retaining, and so they asked for some one-time support, and that has been granted for this coming year. We also, at the recommendation of the membership, will have new professional development programming, still to be determined what that would look like, but for athletic trainers as well as sports communication directors. And then finally, similar to this year, in 2025, the Regional Rules Seminar, we will live stream that, but also similar to this year, that will not satisfy the in-person requirement for institutions that need to attend once every 3 years. However, we know that others being able to listen in and watch that live stream, it will allow for broader education. So those are enrichment fund. We go to championships. Bill talked a little bit about this. A lot is happening in championships. We also are going to put in just over $2.5 million in new initiatives for next year, and then almost $1 million the following year. And these championship enhancements, while the budgets are hitting in those years, will continue every year. So it's not as if they'll disappear after FY26. I think all of you know we're increasing our team championship brackets to a 1 to 6. That is going to have more teams going in those individual team sports. We're increasing per diem by $10. So this year, if you went to a national championship, you received $125. Starting next year, it'll be $135, and then the following year it will go up $5 to $140. Every 2 years, every time we have a new budget, we look to increase our officiating fees for our NCAA championship games and contests, and that's important just so that we can continue to get the best officials for those games. And then we will have a joint championship for men's basketball here in Indianapolis in 2026. The last area are supplemental enhancements that have been approved. And these are enhancements, some will go on for several years, but most will either be for 1 year or for 2 years, FY25 and FY26. And those enhancements are going to be in the range of just over $3.5 million. Bill already covered. We're going to, if you are hosting an NCAA championship, team championship this coming year, you will be required to live stream. We've given out some information around that, but also we'll provide the $1,000 per day to help offset your production or your announcing fees. We also are working with championships and our senior vice president for business management of how do we create a national platform for all those live streams to be in one location. You pick soccer, for example, we have 16 first round games. We don't want to have our fans and our families and all of you having to go to 16 different sites. So we're working to say, how do we put all 16 in one location? This past spring, we did that for men's and women's lacrosse. It was all on NCAA.com. We anticipate something similar, and that would start with our fall championships. And then for those identified team championships, we will live stream every round leading up to the national championship game. Also starting this year for the first time, and it will be a grant for 2 years, institutions can apply for up to $2,000 to use in the health and safety space. We are working on sort of creating that platform, and we'll make sure to send more information out to our institutions so that they can take advantage of that $2,000 grant in FY25, as well as another $2,000 in FY26 to help offset health and safety costs that come with resources or programs. What we are also working on, and this came from the Deloitte review, is purchasing an online mental health module for our head coaches and our athletic trainers. Again, we hope to have this up and running this fall. We will send it out to all of our institutions so that that training can be given to our head coaches to say, how can you help your student athletes by identifying a possible mental health crisis earlier and then getting those student athletes to the right places so that they can get the assistance they need. We plan to have that up and running this year. There will be a higher cost initially, and then moving forward as head coaches and athletic trainers just need to renew that education, that cost will go down, but the division will continue to fund it. And then Bill has already talked about it with the championships, but we're going to provide this flexibility in establishing brackets to protect highly ranked teams. There's some cost behind that, and the councils, at the recommendation of the Championships Committee and Strategic Planning and Finance, approved that to say, yes, let's try this for the next 2 years, get a better feel for what those costs really are. Also, how's it working as we put together those brackets, and then make some decisions after FY26. The last thing I want to give you an update on, and we have talked about this on and off since January, but if I turn the clock back, in December, the NCAA had a lawsuit against them from 3 state attorney generals, and it was in the space of the year in residence, and it was specific at that time to Division I, who had a rule that said if you transfer a second time, you automatically have to sit a year in residence. So we have resolved that lawsuit, but in the meanwhile, what Division I did is they took some action to change that year in residence. Division II took some similar action, but what Division III did back in January is to say, we don't have that type of rule. We do have a rule that if you are academically ineligible and you transfer, you need to sit a year in residence before you could become eligible again. And so our Interpretations and Legislation Committee started to do a deep dive on our current transfer rules and specifically that year in residence. And so they engaged our Student Athlete Advisory Committee, our Faculty Athletics Representative Advisory Group, the Subcommittee for Legislative Relief, and also the membership. We had an opportunity to have the commissioners here in Indianapolis for their summer meeting. We talked to them about it. We talked to individuals who attended the conference rule seminar, as well as the regional rule seminar to say, well, we have our current rule, which is if you are academically ineligible, you need to sit a full year in residence. Is that the right place to be in? Should we remove it altogether, or similar to Division I and Division II, should it be that if you transfer academically ineligible, instead of having a full year, after one term, if you are certified by your new institution, you could become eligible at that point. Based on all the feedback, based on the support from the different governance committees and the general support we heard from the membership, the Interpretations and Legislation Committee forwarded a recommendation to Management Council to make that change. Instead of a full year, to say if you're academically ineligible and you transfer after one term, if your new institution certifies you, then you'd be eligible. Management Council heard that, and they were in agreement with that change. But then what they also heard is based on the lawsuit that had occurred in December, while Division III was not mentioned at that time, our Office of Legal Affairs had heard from other state attorney generals that Division III could be possibly caught up in a future lawsuit. And so Management Council recommended to the President's Council to say, you have emergency legislative authority. It's relatively new. They haven't had it for very long. The Management Council recommended that the President's Council use that to protect the division based on a past lawsuit as well as based on future lawsuits. So yesterday, the President's Council used their emergency legislative authority to pass that right away. It's effective immediately. But keep in mind, this will go to the 2025 convention. The membership needs to ratify it. So if there are concerns with it, it can absolutely be pulled, discussed, re-voted on. But again, based on early information, based on possible legal challenges, President's Council felt that this was in the best decision for the division to act immediately versus waiting until the convention. But they had a really long conversation about it to say, we don't want to take away the voice of the membership, but we feel this is best to act on it now and let the membership ratify it in January of 2025. We will continue to send more information out about that. So for individuals who aren't on this webinar, we'll make sure there's a recap that will go out later today. We'll put it in the bi-weekly communication that we send to athletic directors and to commissioners. And then we also have a president's quarterly update that we send to presidents and chancellors, and we'll make sure to include that information in there as well. So we're at 2:02, so I'm 2 minutes over, but I will pause to see if there are any questions. And if not, I can think back, same with Bill and Allie, we've all been on campus. August turns up to a whole other level of busyness and preparation as you are about to welcome back your students and your student athletes and get ready for pre-seasons and competitions. So we thank you for spending a little time with us. If you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. We're happy to have further conversations with you. And if you get a chance, give a shout of thanks to anybody that serves on a council or a committee. So Katie, I don't know if there are any questions, but I'm happy to answer one or two before we close it out.
You did a great job of wasting a couple seconds there because we did get one more question. Someone just wanted to confirm the transfer legislation is effective now, but could be rolled back at convention by the membership if there were concerns.
That's correct. It is
Thank you.
effective now. President's Council took that action and did it in final format. But it will go to the membership for ratification in January of 25.
And another transfer question just to
Sure.
confirm and clear up. Transfer who is ineligible at their previous institution is ineligible at their new institution for one full-time term only.
That is correct. And then they need to be certified by their new institution. So if that happens, then they'd be eligible after that one full term. And Bill's going to keep me honest on this because I'm steering into our legislative area, which is a bit dangerous.
Yeah, Eloise, you're right. Provided they meet the eligibility requirements after that one full-time term as any other student, then they could regain their eligibility.
Anything else, Katie?
That is the last question. Thank you both.
And we will send lots of information out about that. We will make sure, as I said, we will get it in different formats to different constituents. And we'll make sure also, I know many of you are having conference meetings coming up, that your commissioners know what the action is so that it can be discussed at your conference meetings if needed.
We did have one more come in really quick, Louise. The transfer eligibility, is that just for undergraduates?
I'm going to pause and Bill's going to help me out.
It is for undergraduates only. It is for 2- and 4-year transfers.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to call that a wrap. We thank you for staying 5 minutes over. Thank you for your time. And really, most importantly, thanks for everything you do for our student athletes. Good luck with the start of the new year.